Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe. I'm Adam, and sitting across from me, as always, is Julia. We're truly happy to have you here with us today. Wherever you're listening from, whether it's morning, afternoon, or night, thank you for joining us for another educational journey. Before we begin, we'd like to ask you a small favor. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the English Globe. Your support helps us continue to create thoughtful and informative English podcasts that explore world issues in simple, clear language for learners everywhere. Also, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments where you are listening from and share your opinions about today's topic.
Yes, absolutely. We always enjoy reading your comments and seeing how people from around the world are learning together. It feels wonderful to know that people from so many different countries join us to explore global stories. Today we're diving into a very complex and often misunderstood subject: Afghanistan-Pakistan border war. The truth you haven't heard. Now, this title might sound serious, and yes it is, but our goal here is not to create fear or controversy. Our goal is to educate. To help our English learners understand what's really going on, why this issue exists, and how we can talk about it using clear and balanced language.
That's right. Many people hear news about Afghanistan and Pakistan in short headlines or social media posts, but very few truly understand the deeper history and reality behind the border tension. This isn't just a story about two countries arguing over land. It's about history, culture, politics, and people, all deeply connected by geography and shared experiences. When we look at the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, we're not just talking about lines on a map. We're talking about stories of identity, migration, trade, and sometimes tragedy. This podcast aims to look beyond the headlines and help you, our listeners, understand the full picture, calmly, thoughtfully, and with clear English that supports your learning journey.
Exactly. And while this topic is about politics and conflict, we want to remind everyone that our discussion today is based on education and understanding. We are not here to promote any side or opinion. Instead, we want to analyze the facts, the background, and the human side of this story. YouTube's educational policy encourages us to present information responsibly, and that's what we always aim to do here at the English Globe. So, as we move through today's discussion, please keep an open mind. Try to listen carefully, learn new words, and think about how this topic connects with ideas like peace, communication, and global cooperation.
Let's start with a simple question. Why does this border matter so much? To understand that, we need to go back in time, far back actually, to more than 100 years ago. The Afghanistan-Pakistan border, known as the Durand Line, was drawn during British colonial rule in 1893. But this line didn't just divide land. It divided families, tribes, and cultures that had lived together for centuries. Over time, this line became more than just a border. It became a symbol of national identity and political struggle. Understanding this helps us see why the issue still causes tension even today.
And that's one of the reasons we chose this topic. The Afghanistan-Pakistan border is often in the news, especially when clashes or disagreements happen. But very few people know how this border was created, why it remains disputed, and what both countries believe about it. For learners of English, this is an opportunity to study not only international relations, but also how language is used to explain complex political ideas. You'll hear terms like sovereignty, dispute, conflict, and mediation throughout the episode. We'll make sure to explain these words in simple ways so you can understand and remember them.
This podcast will also help you practice your listening comprehension. We will speak naturally, but clearly. As we go through each section, you'll hear us describe historical facts, recent events, and perspectives from both sides. But we'll always keep the tone respectful and balanced, so that you can learn both about world issues and about how to discuss sensitive topics in English. This kind of knowledge is very useful if you're preparing for English exams like IELTS or TOEFL, or if you're simply interested in learning how to express ideas about global politics in a thoughtful way.
And one more important thing. While we explore this topic, we'll also highlight the importance of empathy. Behind every political issue, there are people. There are families living near the border, traders trying to continue their business, and communities that share languages and traditions despite living on different sides. Understanding that human side of conflict helps us develop compassion, not just knowledge. So, as you listen, try to imagine what life might be like for those who live in those areas.
Yes, and this is where global education becomes powerful. The more we learn about the world, the less we fear it. The more we understand other cultures, the more we realize how connected we all are. That's what the English Globe is all about, bringing together English learning and world understanding. So once again, dear listeners, if you haven't done it yet, please click the like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We read every comment, and we love knowing which part of the world our audience represents.
In this episode, we'll move from the past to the present, from the historical roots of the Afghanistan-Pakistan border to the modern political tensions that sometimes turn violent. We'll explore the Durand Line's origin, the events after 1947 when Pakistan became independent, the Cold War influences, and finally, the situation today. By the end of this episode, you'll have a deeper understanding of how geography, history, and politics are all linked, and how language helps us talk about these complex realities clearly and calmly.
So, stay with us as we begin this long and educational journey through history and diplomacy. We promise that by listening to this podcast, you'll not only learn about one of the most debated borders in the world, but you'll also expand your English vocabulary, improve your listening skills, and gain a new way of seeing international events. And remember, at the English Globe, our mission is to make global knowledge accessible for everyone, in simple English that connects minds across nations.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you to all our listeners for being here. Now that we understand why today's topic is important, let's start exploring where it all began. The story of how a single line drawn on a map more than a century ago shaped decades of relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and why it still matters today.
Now, let's go back to the very beginning of this story, the late 19th century, when much of South Asia was under British colonial rule. To understand the Afghanistan-Pakistan border conflict, we need to first understand how that border came to exist. It all began in 1893, when Sir Mortimer Durand, a British diplomat, was sent to negotiate a boundary line between British India and the Kingdom of Afghanistan. This line would later be known as the Durand Line. The agreement was signed between Durand and the Afghan ruler, Amir Abdur Rahman Khan. But the important question is, why was this line drawn in the first place, and what did it really mean for the people who lived there?
That's a great question, Adam. The British Empire was deeply concerned about the expansion of the Russian Empire during what historians call the Great Game. It was a long period of political rivalry and strategic competition between the British and Russian empires over influence in Central Asia. The British feared that Russia might try to invade India through Afghanistan, so they wanted to clearly define where their territory ended and where Afghanistan's began. The Durand Line was intended to create a buffer zone, an area that could separate the two empires and prevent conflict. However, when they drew this line, they didn't think much about the people who lived there. The Pashtun tribes who had their own traditions, their own land, and their own sense of belonging.
Exactly. The Durand Line cut right through the middle of Pashtun tribal areas. Families, villages, and communities that had lived together for generations suddenly found themselves divided between two different political systems, one under British India and one under the Afghan kingdom. But here's something that many people don't realize. At that time, borders weren't as strict as they are today. People still moved freely for trade, family visits, and seasonal migration. So, while the line existed on paper, for many local tribes, it didn't feel real or meaningful. That difference between map borders and cultural borders is one of the key reasons this issue remains so complicated today.
You're absolutely right, Adam. And it's important to understand that the agreement of 1893 was not meant to be permanent in the eyes of many Afghans. Amir Abdur Rahman Khan saw it as a temporary political arrangement made under pressure. The British, on the other hand, viewed it as a formal, lasting boundary. This difference in interpretation became a root of disagreement that continued even after both empires were gone. When Pakistan became an independent country in 1947, Afghanistan refused to recognize the Durand Line as the official border. In their view, the line was drawn by colonial powers without the consent of the Afghan people, and therefore it lacked legitimacy.
That's a really important point. The British legacy didn't just shape maps, it shaped identities and political relationships that still affect the region today. The British used borders to control movement, influence tribes, and establish their version of order. They created administrative boundaries, forts, and checkpoints to manage what they saw as frontier areas. This is where the idea of the Northwest frontier came from, an area seen as wild, independent, and hard to govern. The British wanted control, but they also wanted to avoid direct confrontation with Afghan tribes. So, they managed these regions through indirect rule, often making deals with tribal leaders. That approach left behind a very complex legacy that Pakistan later inherited.
And what makes this even more interesting is how culture, language, and identity became part of the political question. The Pashtuns are one of the largest ethnic groups in both Afghanistan and Pakistan. They share a common language, Pashto, and a strong tribal code of honor known as Pashtunwali. When the Durand Line divided their lands, it didn't divide their sense of identity. Many Pashtuns continued to see themselves as part of a single people, no matter which side of the border they lived on. This cultural unity became one of the main reasons Afghanistan continued to challenge the border. They argued that the Pashtuns in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa region, formerly the Northwest Frontier Province, should have the right to decide whether they wanted to join Afghanistan or remain in Pakistan.
That idea later became known as Pashtunistan, a proposed independent homeland for Pashtuns on both sides of the border. Although it never materialized, it became a major source of political tension between the two countries for decades. Afghanistan believed that the people living in those areas were historically, culturally, and linguistically connected to them. Pakistan, on the other hand, insisted that the Durand Line was a legally recognized international border inherited from British India. These two opposing views created a deep and long-lasting mistrust that continues to influence diplomatic relations even today.
If we think about this from a language learning point of view, it's a good example of how the words boundary, border, and frontier have slightly different meanings. A boundary is a line that marks the limits of an area, often used in maps or legal contexts. A border usually refers to the dividing line between two political entities, like countries. And a frontier often refers to an undeveloped or loosely controlled region near the edge of a country. The Durand Line has been described in all three ways at different times, as a boundary by the British, as a disputed border by Afghanistan, and as a frontier by historians.
That's a brilliant point, Julia. Vocabulary and context really help us understand history. Now, another thing worth noting is that the Afghan kings who followed Abdur Rahman Khan, such as his son Habibullah Khan and later King Amanullah Khan, also expressed dissatisfaction with the Durand Line. But at the same time, Afghanistan faced internal challenges like modernization, tribal revolts, and political reforms. So, the border issue didn't always take center stage. It was more like a background tension that resurfaced at different points, especially when the political situation in the region changed.
Yes, and those moments of resurfacing often happened during periods of instability or transition. For example, when British India was moving toward independence in the 1940s, Afghan leaders again raised questions about the border's future. They wanted international recognition that the tribes living along the Durand Line should be allowed to choose their own destiny. However, when Pakistan was created in 1947, the new government immediately declared that it inherited all the borders of British India, including the Durand Line. That declaration became a central piece of Pakistan's national identity and security policy.
So, what we see here is how a border drawn over a century ago continues to shape modern politics. It wasn't just a geographical decision, it was a political one, made in a specific historical context, without consulting the people who would live with its consequences. And that, in many ways, explains why this issue is still sensitive. The Durand Line isn't just a line on a map, it's a line through history, culture, and identity. Every time tension rises along the border, these old memories come back to life, reminding both nations of unresolved questions from the past.
That's right. And as English learners, it's important to notice how language shapes our understanding of such issues. Words like dispute, legacy, sovereignty, and recognition often appear in discussions like this. Each of these words carries a deeper meaning that connects to both law and emotion. For example, sovereignty means the right of a country to govern itself without outside interference. When Afghanistan says it doesn't recognize the Durand Line, it's making a statement about sovereignty, about who has the right to decide borders and what makes them legitimate.
That's such a clear way to explain it, Julia. So, to summarize this section, the Durand Line was drawn in 1893 as part of a British colonial strategy to separate spheres of influence. It divided communities, languages, and traditions that had existed for centuries. Afghanistan has long viewed it as an artificial line created without consent, while Pakistan considers it a legitimate international boundary. The tension between these two views, one historical, one legal, has become the foundation for decades of political friction. Understanding this helps us see that today's border conflicts didn't appear overnight. They are the results of history that still echoes today.
Beautifully said, Adam. And now that we've explored the origins of the border and how colonial history set the stage, we can move forward to the next chapter. What happened after 1947, when Pakistan became independent and the modern dispute truly began to take shape? That period marked the beginning of a new era, where history met politics and old boundaries took on new meanings.
When British India was divided in 1947, two new countries emerged, India and Pakistan. Overnight, maps changed, borders shifted, and millions of people moved across new frontiers. But for Afghanistan, the birth of Pakistan brought a question that had been waiting since 1893. What would happen to the Durand Line now? Afghanistan argued that since the agreement had been made between the British and Emir Abdur Rahman Khan, it was no longer valid once the British left. Pakistan, however, insisted that it had inherited all of British India's boundaries, including the Durand Line. That disagreement immediately became a central issue in their relationship.
Exactly, Adam. The young Afghan government, led by King Zahir Shah at the time, believed that the tribes living along the border, especially the Pashtuns, should have the right to decide their future. Afghanistan asked for a referendum to let those tribes choose between joining Pakistan, remaining independent, or uniting with Afghanistan. But Pakistan rejected this idea, saying that the border was already established under international law. This disagreement quickly created tension between the two countries, and diplomatic relations began on shaky ground. It was a complex moment. One country was celebrating independence, while the other was questioning the foundation of its borders.
The situation became even more complicated because of tribal identity. Many of the people living near the border didn't necessarily see themselves as either Pakistani or Afghan. They were Pashtuns first, loyal to their tribes, traditions, and local networks. The British had previously allowed these areas a degree of autonomy, calling them tribal agencies. When Pakistan inherited these territories, it had to find a way to govern them without losing control or provoking rebellion. The new government introduced administrative systems, but the tribal people were not always comfortable with centralized rule. This created friction that both Afghanistan and Pakistan used in their political messaging.
Yes, and that's when the idea of Pashtunistan started to gain strength. Afghanistan supported this idea, suggesting that the Pashtuns of Pakistan should have their own independent homeland. Pakistan saw this as a direct threat to its unity, believing that such a movement could encourage separatism and weaken the new country. In 1949, things escalated further when Afghanistan's parliament officially declared that it did not recognize the Durand Line or any agreements made with the British regarding the border. This declaration was symbolic, but it sent a strong message to Pakistan and the international community.
That was a defining moment. Relations between the two countries began to deteriorate rapidly after that. Afghanistan started supporting Pashtun nationalist movements inside Pakistan, while Pakistan viewed this as interference in its internal affairs. The border area became a zone of suspicion and occasional clashes. One of the earliest confrontations occurred in the 1950s, when Afghanistan accused Pakistan of mistreating Pashtuns in the tribal regions. In 1955, protests broke out in Kabul, and angry mobs attacked the Pakistani embassy and consulates. This event forced both governments to suspend diplomatic relations for several months.
The 1955 incident was one of the first public signs of how deeply emotions ran on both sides. For Afghanistan, it was about defending cultural identity and the rights of their ethnic kin. For Pakistan, it was about national sovereignty and security. Both governments used the issue to rally their populations and strengthen their internal political positions. But behind the political slogans, border communities suffered from instability. Trade routes were disrupted, travel became harder, and mistrust spread among the people who had lived peacefully across the frontier for centuries.
Exactly. Then, in the early 1960s, tensions reached another high point during what became known as the Bajar Campaign. This was a military operation by Pakistan to drive out armed groups that had crossed into its territory from Afghanistan. Pakistan accused Kabul of supporting these fighters, while Afghanistan denied direct involvement and claimed it was only supporting local tribes defending their rights. The conflict led to brief border skirmishes, airstrikes, and casualties on both sides. It also led to a complete breakdown of diplomatic relations between 1961 and 1963, when embassies were closed and trade came to a halt.
The Bajar incident revealed something important. Both countries were struggling to define what it meant to be neighbors after colonialism. Afghanistan wanted to protect its cultural influence among Pashtuns, while Pakistan wanted to establish control over its frontier and prove itself as a stable new nation. During this time, both sides also turned to foreign allies for support. Afghanistan sought closer ties with the Soviet Union, while Pakistan strengthened its relationship with the United States through defense agreements like the SEATO and CENTO alliances. This added a global layer to a regional issue, turning a border disagreement into a small piece of the larger Cold War puzzle.
That's a very insightful point, Julia. The Cold War made everything more complicated. The United States viewed Pakistan as an ally in its containment strategy against communism, while the Soviet Union saw Afghanistan as a partner in its regional influence. Each country received economic and military aid from their respective allies, which increased their capacity but also deepened mistrust. The border issue was no longer just a local matter. It had become part of global politics. Every small clash or political statement was seen through the lens of the Cold War, which made peace much harder to achieve.
It's interesting to think about how these international alliances influenced language and communication, too. During that time, media in both countries began using stronger words to describe each other. Terms like aggression, interference, and sovereignty violation appeared in newspapers and speeches. These are powerful words that can easily shape public opinion. For English learners, it's a good reminder that word choice in political communication matters a lot. The language used in diplomacy can either calm a situation or make it worse. Understanding these nuances is essential for anyone who wants to study international relations in English.
Absolutely. And one of the key things to remember about this period is that despite these conflicts, there were also attempts at reconciliation. In 1963, with the help of mediation from other countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan finally agreed to restore diplomatic relations. Trade routes reopened, ambassadors returned, and communication resumed. It was a small but important step toward peace. However, the deeper issues, the question of the Durand Line, Pashtun identity, and trust, remained unresolved. The two countries had managed to calm the situation temporarily, but the roots of the dispute were still alive beneath the surface.
That's true. And in many ways, the events from 1947 to 1963 set the stage for everything that followed. Both sides had tested each other's limits, and both had learned how fragile peace could be. The border had gone from a colonial line on a map to a living symbol of national pride and suspicion. Every generation since then has inherited that complexity. It's one of those rare situations in international politics where geography, history, ethnicity, and emotion all meet at the same point. Understanding this helps us see why, even today, the Afghanistan-Pakistan border remains one of the most sensitive and unpredictable frontiers in the world.
That's perfectly put, Julia. And this is why we must look carefully at what came next. The 1960s and 70s were decades of dramatic change, not only in South Asia, but across the world. Afghanistan would undergo political reforms, while Pakistan would face wars and internal challenges. The two countries' relationship would continue to rise and fall like a tide, influenced by foreign powers, ideology, and domestic politics. To truly understand the Afghanistan-Pakistan border war, we need to look at how those years shaped the region's security environment and how external powers began to play a bigger role.
Exactly. In our next section, we'll explore how the Cold War, the rise of new political movements, and the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 completely transformed the meaning of this border. The region became not just a local conflict zone, but a center of global attention. The Durand Line turned into a line between superpowers, ideologies, and the dreams of millions who wanted peace but found themselves in the middle of history. To understand why the Afghanistan-Pakistan border became so sensitive, we need to look at the Cold War. During that period, both the United States and the Soviet Union were trying to expand their influence around the world. Afghanistan, sitting right between the Soviet Union and South Asia, became a key point of interest. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979, everything changed. Pakistan suddenly became one of the most important allies for the West. It was the main route for military and financial aid sent to Afghan resistance fighters, known as the Mujahideen.
That's a crucial moment in history, Julia. The Afghan-Pakistan border transformed into a corridor of conflict and intelligence operations. Many camps were built along the border to train fighters, and the region became full of international attention. The United States, Saudi Arabia, and other countries supported the Mujahideen through Pakistan. At the same time, millions of Afghan refugees crossed into Pakistan, escaping war and violence. It was one of the largest refugee movements of the 20th century, and it changed the social and political structure of Pakistan's border areas forever.
You're absolutely right, Adam. The war not only brought foreign aid, but also weapons, ideology, and powerful militant groups. When the Soviet Union finally withdrew in 1989, the region didn't find peace. Instead, Afghanistan fell into civil war, and many of the same groups that once fought the Soviets turned against each other. Pakistan continued to play a strategic role, supporting certain factions to ensure that its interests were protected. The border became a proxy zone, where local conflicts were influenced by global powers and regional politics.
And those dynamics still echo today. The term safe havens became widely used because some insurgent groups operated in areas that were difficult to control. The mountains and remote tribal lands along the border made it nearly impossible for any government to monitor every movement. Intelligence networks, covert operations, and cross-border raids became part of daily life for people in those regions. The trust between the two countries weakened as both blamed each other for harboring or supporting certain groups.
This period also shaped how the world viewed Afghanistan and Pakistan. The border became symbolic, not just of political division, but of a deeper struggle for power and survival in a region caught between global rivalries. For decades, it was less a peaceful boundary and more a shifting line of control and influence. Understanding this Cold War legacy is essential because even after the fall of the Soviet Union, the same tensions and mistrust continued into the modern era. After the Soviet withdrawal in 1989, Afghanistan entered a long and painful civil war. Different groups, once united against a common enemy, began fighting for control of the country. Amid this chaos, a new force began to rise in the mid-1990s, a movement that called itself the Taliban. They promised to bring order, enforce Islamic law, and end the corruption that had spread across the nation. The Taliban gained rapid support, especially from Afghan refugees and religious students in Pakistan's border regions. Their roots were deep in the madrasas, Islamic schools, where many young men had grown up during years of war and displacement.
That's right, Julia. When the Taliban captured Kabul in 1996, they brought a kind of stability, though it came with strict rules and limited freedoms. Pakistan recognized the Taliban government and saw them as a strategic ally who could secure its western border. However, the relationship between Afghanistan and Pakistan became complicated again after the attacks of September 11, 2001. The United States invaded Afghanistan, accusing the Taliban of sheltering Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. Pakistan joined the US-led coalition, but this move created deep divisions inside the country, especially in the tribal areas where many sympathized with the Afghan Taliban.
Exactly, Adam. During that time, a new group emerged, Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan, also known as the TTP. This group consisted of militants from Pakistan's tribal belt who shared ideological ties with the Afghan Taliban, but had different goals. While the Afghan Taliban focused on fighting foreign forces inside Afghanistan, the TTP turned against Pakistan itself. They claimed they were resisting the government's alliance with the West and wanted to impose their own version of Islamic rule. What followed was a wave of deadly attacks, suicide bombings, and assaults that targeted schools, markets, and even the military.
The most dangerous part of this situation, Julia, was how easily these groups could move across the border. The terrain between Afghanistan and Pakistan is extremely rough, filled with mountains, caves, and narrow valleys. Many parts are so remote that even modern armies struggle to monitor them. These militants used the porous border to escape military operations, regroup, and launch new attacks. Whenever Pakistan conducted an operation, some fighters would cross into Afghanistan. When Afghanistan tried to crack down, they would move back into Pakistan. This cross-border flow of fighters created constant tension and mistrust.
And that mistrust turned into political accusations. Pakistan accused Afghanistan of allowing the TTP to find shelter in its eastern provinces, especially after 2014, when many Pakistani operations pushed militants across the border. Afghanistan, on the other hand, accused Pakistan of continuing to support or tolerate the Afghan Taliban, who used Pakistani soil to plan and organize attacks inside Afghanistan. Both sides denied the claims, yet both continued to suffer from violence that originated from the same borderlands. The line that divided the two countries also connected their insecurities.
It's important to remember that for local people, this border doesn't mean much in daily life. Families still share ties on both sides, and many villages are split between Afghanistan and Pakistan. When one side becomes unsafe, people simply cross to the other. This made it even harder for either government to separate civilians from militants. Moreover, the lack of economic opportunities, education, and infrastructure made these areas fertile ground for recruitment. Young men who grew up amid war and poverty often saw militancy as a path to survival, or even a duty.
Over time, both governments realized that this problem could not be solved by force alone. Pakistan built fences along much of the border to stop illegal crossings, but the mountains and complex terrain made complete control nearly impossible. Afghanistan, especially during its years of instability, struggled to extend its authority to the border provinces. International forces tried to coordinate joint operations, but mistrust, political disagreements, and differing priorities often stopped real cooperation. As a result, militant groups continued to find ways to survive, shift positions, and exploit the weaknesses of both sides.
What makes this even more complex, Julia, is that both countries are victims and accused at the same time. Each side believes the other shelters those who bring instability. In truth, the border has become more than a political boundary. It's a living zone of insecurity shaped by decades of war, migration, and competing interests. The Taliban's return to power in Afghanistan in 2021 has only added new layers to this dynamic, raising questions about what comes next for Pakistan's own fight against militancy.
Yes, and understanding this cycle of accusation, distrust, and cross-border movement helps explain why peace has been so hard to achieve. The rise of the Taliban, the creation of the TTP, and the constant spillover of violence have turned this border into one of the most volatile frontiers in the world. For Afghanistan and Pakistan, the challenge isn't just about defining their territory, it's about rebuilding trust, addressing the causes of militancy, and giving the people living in those rugged borderlands a future that doesn't depend on conflict. As we move into the most recent period, it's important to look at verified incidents along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border since 2024. Multiple skirmishes have been reported in various sectors, including Kunar, Khost, and Bajaur. Local officials have confirmed that small arms fire, mortar shelling, and occasional airstrikes have occurred. These clashes have generally been short but intense, often triggered by alleged border incursions or militant movements. Civilians in nearby villages have sometimes been forced to leave their homes temporarily, and humanitarian groups report disruption of basic services like schools and markets.
That's right, Julia. When we analyze these clashes, we notice a recurring pattern. Pakistan often claims that Afghan forces or militants crossed the border to attack Pakistani posts, citing incursions and casualties among soldiers. Afghanistan, in turn, frequently denies any direct involvement of its military and instead blames Pakistani forces for violating Afghan sovereignty. Both sides provide casualty figures that differ significantly, making it difficult for independent observers to confirm the exact numbers. These discrepancies highlight how information is contested and can be shaped by national narratives.
And that's a crucial point. Most reports come from military or government sources, which have their own interests in framing the events in a particular way. Independent verification is often weak, especially in remote mountainous regions that are difficult for journalists or neutral observers to access. NGOs and international monitoring groups sometimes provide updates, but their coverage is limited. Because of this, news about clashes can be confusing for audiences. It's important for listeners to understand that not all claims are fully verified and that reports should be read with caution.
Another pattern we notice is that clashes often coincide with periods of heightened tension elsewhere in the region. For example, diplomatic disagreements, high-level meetings, or international conferences sometimes precede sudden incidents on the border. Analysts suggest that some of these skirmishes may be intentional signals to demonstrate strength or assert sovereignty. At the same time, local militants take advantage of these conditions to move across the border or settle scores, further complicating the situation.
Absolutely. Civilians are often the most affected, caught between military forces and insurgent activity. Cross-border attacks have disrupted trade, limited access to essential goods, and created temporary refugee movements within Pakistan and Afghanistan. Reports indicate that in some areas, schools have closed and markets have shut down for days during skirmishes. Humanitarian agencies emphasize that these disruptions are hard to quantify but have long-term consequences on education, health, and local economies.
One more point to consider is the role of technology and media. Both Afghanistan and Pakistan use social media, news outlets, and military statements to report incidents. But these sources can exaggerate or selectively present information. For instance, videos and photos are sometimes shared without full context, which can create the impression of larger-scale conflicts than what actually occurred. This makes it even more important for audiences to critically evaluate claims and look for multiple sources.
Exactly. For English learners, this is a good example of how words matter in reporting conflict. Terms like incursion, crossfire, sovereignty violation, and militant activity carry precise meanings but can also be used to frame narratives. When Pakistani officials say an incursion occurred, they mean a violation of national territory. When Afghan officials deny involvement, they emphasize that no sovereignty violation took place. Understanding these subtle differences is key to analyzing news critically and avoiding assumptions based on partial information.
Furthermore, casualty figures are often disputed. Pakistan may report several soldiers injured or killed during an incident, while Afghanistan reports none. Independent organizations, including international monitoring bodies, often cannot confirm exact numbers due to the remote terrain. Civilian casualty figures are particularly difficult to verify, as many affected families may avoid reporting for safety reasons. This creates a fog of uncertainty, where each side presents a version that supports its own narrative.
It's also important to note that while clashes have increased in some sectors, the overall intensity of conflict varies. Some areas experience sporadic exchanges of fire, while others remain calm for long periods. The border is nearly 2,400 kilometers long, with mountains, rivers, and valleys that make monitoring difficult. This geography allows militants, border patrols, and local residents to move unpredictably, which contributes to misunderstandings and allegations of violations.
In summary, the recent clashes from 2024 to the present illustrate several key points. First, both countries claim violations and report casualties, but independent verification is limited. Second, these incidents are often localized and tied to larger political dynamics. Third, civilians continue to bear the brunt of the conflict, and misinformation can amplify tension. Finally, accurate reporting is challenging due to the difficult terrain and strategic interests of both nations. Recognizing these factors helps listeners understand that border tensions are complex and require careful interpretation.
And as English learners, it's valuable to notice how factual reporting and cautious language differ from opinion or propaganda. Words like alleged, reported, confirmed, and denied are used to indicate uncertainty and responsibility in news. By paying attention to these terms, you not only improve comprehension, but also learn how to discuss sensitive topics thoughtfully and accurately.
So, when you read or hear about border clashes, remember that both claims and counterclaims exist. Each side presents a story shaped by history, politics, and strategic interests. The real situation is often nuanced, with facts difficult to verify independently. By approaching this topic with critical thinking and careful language, listeners can gain a clearer understanding without falling into exaggeration or bias.
That's right, Adam. Understanding the patterns, claims, and counterclaims along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border is essential for anyone interested in current events, international relations, or global security. And it's equally important for English learners to see how careful, precise language helps convey complex realities while remaining educational, factual, and respectful. One of the most influential factors in the Afghanistan-Pakistan border conflict is the role of media and public narratives. Both countries use news outlets, social media, and official statements to shape perceptions of events along the border. In Pakistan, reports often emphasize the threat posed by militants allegedly operating from Afghan territory. Television channels, newspapers, and online platforms highlight incursions, casualties, and border skirmishes, often framing the story to show Pakistan defending its sovereignty. This creates a narrative where the country appears as a victim of cross-border aggression.
Similarly, Afghanistan uses media to convey its perspective, Julia. Afghan outlets and government statements often deny allegations of harboring militants and instead portray Pakistan as violating Afghan sovereignty. Statements from Kabul may highlight airstrikes or troop movements inside Afghan territory as provocations. Both countries, therefore, present selective facts that support their own positions, emphasizing one side's losses while downplaying the others. This selective framing can easily inflame public opinion and increase mistrust between populations, particularly in areas directly affected by the border conflicts.
Another key aspect is the use of social media, which has become a powerful platform for sharing information, and sometimes misinformation. Videos, images, and reports can go viral quickly, often without proper verification. A short clip of gunfire or movement along the border can be interpreted in completely different ways depending on the caption or commentary. In some cases, old footage has been circulated as evidence of recent clashes, leading to confusion and panic. This is why understanding the source, date, and context of media content is so important when analyzing border incidents.
That's right. Exaggeration and propaganda are common tactics. Both governments and sometimes militant groups use language that dramatizes events to strengthen national narratives. Terms like aggression, infiltration, violation of sovereignty, and terrorist threat are frequently repeated. While these words may accurately describe some situations, their repeated use without nuance can create a skewed perception of the conflict. For example, a small border exchange may be described as a major military confrontation, influencing public perception and political rhetoric far beyond the actual event.
Exactly, Adam. This makes critical thinking a crucial skill for anyone following news about the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Listeners and readers should ask questions like, who is reporting this? Is there evidence from multiple sources? Are independent journalists or organizations confirming the claims? For example, international monitoring groups or non-governmental organizations sometimes provide verified updates, but their coverage is limited due to difficult terrain and security risks. Cross-checking reports from different perspectives helps provide a more balanced understanding.
Another method is to analyze language carefully. Words like alleged or reported indicate that a statement has not been independently verified, while terms like confirmed suggest verification by multiple sources. By noting the difference, readers can separate fact from opinion or propaganda. Additionally, paying attention to visuals is important. Images or videos may be edited or repurposed from past events. Critical viewers should consider the source, context, and reliability before forming conclusions.
It's also useful to understand how political motives shape media coverage. For example, governments may highlight border incidents to strengthen domestic support or justify military actions. At the same time, media in both countries often appeals to national identity, emphasizing shared cultural or historical narratives. This can create strong emotional responses, leading audiences to accept information uncritically. For English learners, observing these patterns can also improve vocabulary and comprehension, especially in political and news contexts.
Furthermore, misinformation isn't limited to official media. Online forums, messaging apps, and social media channels can spread unverified claims rapidly. Memes, screenshots, and forwarded messages often present dramatic interpretations of events. Some users may deliberately exaggerate incidents to provoke fear, anger, or political support. Recognizing these tactics is essential for forming informed opinions. A healthy skepticism doesn't mean rejecting all reports. It means evaluating evidence, sources, and consistency before drawing conclusions.
Education and awareness are the best defenses against misinformation. For English learners, reading news in multiple languages, comparing international reports, and paying attention to word choice can enhance both understanding of global events and language skills. It's also helpful to practice summarizing reports in your own words, noting what is fact, what is claimed, and what remains unverified. This strengthens comprehension and critical thinking simultaneously.
In conclusion, media and narratives play a decisive role in shaping perceptions of the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Both countries use reporting and statements to reinforce their positions, while exaggeration and misinformation can inflame public opinion. By critically evaluating sources, analyzing language, and cross-checking information, audiences can gain a clearer, more balanced picture of events. This approach not only improves understanding of this complex conflict, but also builds skills for navigating global news responsibly and thoughtfully.
Yes, Adam. Recognizing media framing, questioning narratives, and being aware of propaganda are essential steps for anyone trying to understand the border conflict. Careful reading, cross-referencing, and understanding context help listeners separate verified facts from politically charged storytelling. Ultimately, media literacy empowers people to make informed decisions, and it's a critical skill for students, researchers, and anyone interested in international relations and history. When discussing the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, it's easy to focus only on governments, armies, and militant groups. But we must remember that millions of ordinary people live along this frontier. For centuries, tribes, families, and communities have crossed the border for trade, social gatherings, and cultural events. These borderlands are home to Pashtuns, Nuristanis, and other ethnic groups whose daily lives are shaped far more by mountains, valleys, and rivers than by national boundaries. For them, identity often transcends the political lines drawn on maps. Many villages still speak multiple languages, follow shared customs, and maintain kinship ties across the border.
Exactly, Julia. Yet decades of conflict have made life increasingly precarious for these communities. Cross-border skirmishes, insurgent activity, and military operations disrupt daily life. Trade routes that have existed for generations can suddenly become unsafe, cutting off essential goods, livestock markets, and access to schools. Farmers may abandon their fields during heightened tensions, and families may relocate temporarily to safer areas. Even small incidents of violence can create ripple effects, affecting food security, employment, and access to medical care. The impact is far-reaching, often leaving people trapped between state authorities and armed groups.
Refugees are another critical aspect of this story. Since the Soviet invasion in 1979, Pakistan has hosted millions of Afghan refugees. These populations often live in camps near the border or integrate into nearby towns. While some have returned to Afghanistan over the years, ongoing insecurity, economic difficulties, and renewed clashes have caused continuous displacement. Living in these camps or temporary settlements presents challenges, including limited access to education, healthcare, and employment. Children growing up in these conditions face disrupted schooling and limited social opportunities, affecting generations of families along the border.
And it's not just Afghan refugees in Pakistan. Internal displacement within Afghanistan itself is also significant. Border areas often become conflict zones first, forcing communities to leave their homes in search of safety. People move to more secure regions within the country, creating additional pressures on infrastructure, schools, and healthcare facilities. These movements also affect social cohesion. Families may be separated for months or even years, and cultural ties that span the border are sometimes weakened, making it difficult to maintain traditional support networks.
Health and education are deeply affected as well. Conflict and displacement interrupt schooling for children and teenagers, while clinics and hospitals often lack sufficient staff or supplies due to security concerns. Vaccination campaigns, maternal health programs, and disease prevention efforts are disrupted during periods of tension. In refugee camps, overpopulation and inadequate infrastructure create additional risks for communicable diseases. These human costs are less visible in media reports, but represent the ongoing consequences of decades of border instability.
And yet, amid these challenges, border communities continue to show resilience. Families adapt to changing circumstances, maintain social networks, and preserve cultural practices despite insecurity. Many villages organize informal councils to manage disputes, share resources, and support displaced families. Markets reopen as soon as conditions allow, and trade gradually resumes, reflecting a determination to sustain life despite political and military pressures. This resilience highlights the human spirit's ability to endure in regions often portrayed only as conflict zones.
Finally, understanding these human experiences reminds us that the Afghanistan-Pakistan border is not just a political line or a military front. It is a living space where people interact daily, build communities, and maintain identities that transcend national boundaries. Recognizing this perspective helps contextualize the broader conflict. Policies and interventions, whether humanitarian, economic, or security-oriented, must consider the realities of these communities. Supporting education, healthcare, and economic opportunities can be as important as diplomatic efforts in creating lasting stability.
In conclusion, Julia, the story of the border cannot be told solely through military reports or political statements. The experiences of refugees, displaced persons, and local tribes reveal the real cost of decades-long disputes. Trade, education, social cohesion, and cultural continuity are all affected. Yet, the enduring connections across the border, the resilience of communities, and their adaptive strategies show that human life persists, even in the most challenging circumstances. Understanding this dimension is essential for anyone studying the region.
Exactly, Adam. When we discuss conflicts like the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, it's critical to remember the human face behind headlines. The resilience, struggles, and aspirations of these communities highlight that stability, security, and peace must go hand in hand with diplomacy. For listeners, recognizing these human impacts offers a more complete, empathetic understanding of the region, beyond maps and official narratives. As we reach the conclusion of our discussion on the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, it is essential to step back and reflect on the lessons we can learn from this complex history. The border has long been more than just a line on a map. It is a region shaped by centuries of politics, culture, geography, and human resilience. From the Durand Line Agreement of 1893 to the present-day skirmishes and humanitarian crises, the story of this frontier illustrates how historical decisions continue to affect the present. Understanding these dynamics requires looking beyond headlines and exploring the social, economic, and political realities of both countries.
Indeed, Julia. One of the key lessons is that borders are not just political constructs, but also social and human landscapes. The people living along this frontier often experience the consequences of conflict more directly than policymakers or analysts. Their lives are disrupted by insecurity, displacement, and economic instability, yet they maintain cultural connections that defy national divisions. This reminds us that any approach to peace and stability must prioritize the human dimension, alongside diplomatic, military, and strategic considerations.
Another important reflection is on the role of trust and diplomacy. Decades of mistrust between Afghanistan and Pakistan have made it difficult to resolve disputes, whether over the Durand Line, cross-border militancy, or refugee management. Both countries have experienced moments of cooperation, but these have often been short-lived. Building lasting peace requires consistent dialogue, confidence-building measures, and recognition of each other's security and political concerns. This also involves engagement with local communities who are directly affected by border policies and conflicts.
The history of external involvement also provides critical lessons. During the Cold War and subsequent decades, foreign powers played significant roles in shaping the border's dynamics, often prioritizing their strategic interests over regional stability. The influx of aid, weapons, and ideological influence intensified conflicts and sometimes prolonged insecurity. Moving forward, regional stability will depend on reducing external interference that exacerbates tensions while supporting local governance, development, and conflict resolution mechanisms.
Humanitarian considerations are equally important. Refugees, displaced persons, and border communities have lived through repeated waves of conflict. Addressing their needs requires more than emergency relief. It involves long-term solutions such as education, healthcare, infrastructure, and livelihood opportunities. Strengthening the resilience of these communities not only improves quality of life, but also reduces the appeal of militancy and extremist ideologies, contributing to lasting peace in the region.
Communication and media literacy also emerge as crucial lessons. As we discussed earlier, both countries use media to frame narratives, often exaggerating events or presenting selective information. Misinformation can inflame tensions and shape public perceptions in ways that hinder diplomacy. Promoting accurate reporting, critical thinking, and cross-checking of information can help citizens better understand the situation and engage in constructive dialogue rather than being swayed by propaganda.
Another reflection concerns the geography itself. The rugged mountains, deep valleys, and remote villages along the border have historically made governance difficult. Yet, this same terrain has preserved cultural connections and provided spaces for local governance, trade, and social networks. Future policies should recognize the unique geographical challenges and leverage local knowledge and community-based solutions to address security, development, and cross-border cooperation effectively.
In terms of moving forward, regional cooperation is essential. Afghanistan and Pakistan must work together on shared challenges such as border management, counter-terrorism, refugee integration, and trade facilitation. Confidence-building measures, joint monitoring mechanisms, and humanitarian collaboration can help reduce misunderstandings and prevent small incidents from escalating into larger conflicts. The international community can support these initiatives, but should prioritize local leadership and respect the sovereignty and agency of both nations.
Education and awareness are also part of the path forward. Teaching younger generations about history, culture, and peaceful conflict resolution can foster mutual understanding. Language learning, cross-border exchanges, and cultural programs can help bridge divides and challenge the stereotypes that fuel hostility. For English learners and global audiences, understanding the nuances of this border conflict highlights the importance of context, critical thinking, and empathy when studying international relations.
Finally, reflecting on this long and complex history reminds us that peace is not achieved overnight. It requires sustained effort, patience, and the willingness to address deep-rooted issues honestly. The Afghanistan-Pakistan border has seen decades of conflict, but it has also been home to resilient communities who continue to live, trade, and maintain cultural ties. Any sustainable solution must consider their needs, histories, and identities, as well as the broader political, economic, and strategic dynamics of the region.
In conclusion, this border story teaches us about the interplay of history, politics, geography, and human life. From past agreements and Cold War interventions to recent clashes and humanitarian crises, each episode contributes to a larger narrative of challenge and resilience. Understanding these complexities equips policymakers, students, and global citizens with the knowledge to support peaceful solutions and meaningful dialogue. It reminds us that conflict and cooperation often exist side by side, and that learning from history is essential to shaping a more stable and just future.
That's a comprehensive reflection, Julia. For our listeners, the takeaway is clear. The Afghanistan-Pakistan border is not just a line on a map. It is a living region shaped by people, politics, and history. Appreciating the human dimension, critically evaluating narratives, and fostering cooperation are essential for anyone who wishes to understand or contribute to regional stability. The lessons we've explored today show that knowledge, empathy, and patience are powerful tools in addressing even the most complex conflicts.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this journey. Understanding the Afghanistan-Pakistan border requires a balance of history, human perspective, and careful analysis. By learning from the past and observing the realities on the ground, we can better appreciate the challenges and opportunities that exist along this frontier. For anyone following global affairs, this case is a reminder that borders are not only political divisions, but also spaces where human life, culture, and resilience continue to thrive despite adversity.